two brothers walked into the Florida woods on an April afternoon in 1978 and vanished, without leaving a single trace. No footprints in the mud, no torn clothing on the branches, no witnesses after the trail curved out of sight. For decades, investigators searched canals, interviewed suspects, and followed leads that dissolved like morning fog. The case that began with a simple errand to the store became one of Central Florida's most haunting mysteries. But what happened to 7-year-old Ricky and 5-year-old John France? Some questions refuse to stay buried. Before we get into the story, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. The afternoon sun filters through the open windows of the France home in Deltona, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. Mother moves between the counter and refrigerator, preparing a small grocery list with practiced efficiency. The house carries the comfortable rhythm of a Thursday afternoon in April 1978, quiet, warm, safe. Ricky appears in the doorway, his 7-year-old frame filling the space with restless energy. Behind him, 5-year-old John mirrors his brother's movements, waiting for whatever adventure the afternoon might bring. Mother glances at the clock. 3:00 p.m. I need milk and bread from the store, she says, folding the handwritten list. You boys know the path through the woods. Stay together, go straight there, and come straight back. Ricky nods, with the confidence of a child who has made this journey many times before. John tugs at his shoes, eager to follow wherever his older brother leads. The wooded shortcut behind their neighborhood is familiar territory, a half-mile trail that connects their street to the small grocery store, well worn by local children and considered perfectly safe. Outside, neighbors chat casually on their porches, windows open to catch the spring breeze. Children play in front yards under the watchful but relaxed supervision that defined suburban life in the late 1970s. Trust runs deep in this community, where everyone knows everyone else's children. Remember, Mother calls as the boys head toward the door, together the whole time. By 3:10 p.m., Ricky and John are out the door, walking toward the tree-lined path that will swallow their laughter and their footsteps forever. The humid Florida air hangs heavy with the sound of cicadas as Ricky and John enter the wooded trail. Dappled sunlight creates shifting patterns on the dirt path beneath their feet. The familiar terrain feels safe. They have walked this route dozens of times, sometimes racing each other to see who can reach the store first. A neighbor working in her garden glances up as the brothers pass. Later, she will remember their voices carrying through the trees, unhurried and happy. The normalcy of the moment will haunt her for years to come. John skips to keep pace with his older brother's longer stride. Ricky walks with the purposeful confidence of a child entrusted with an important task. Neither boy shows any concern as they move deeper into the woods, where the canopy thickens and the sounds of the neighborhood fade behind them. The path curves gently to the right, following the natural contours of the land. Spanish moss hangs from oak branches like tattered curtains. Somewhere ahead lies the store, but the trail must wind through dense brush, past drainage canals, and around marshy areas that collect rainwater from Florida's frequent afternoon showers. Minutes pass in the ordinary silence of children walking through familiar woods. No sounds of distress, no calls for help, no evidence of struggle or fear. Minutes later, the trail curves out of sight, and two small figures disappear into the bend where sunlight cannot reach. The woods close around them like a door that will never open again. Back at the France home, Mother checks the clock again. 3:40 p.m. The boys should have returned by now. The round trip typically takes no more than 30 minutes, even accounting for a few minutes of browsing at the store. She moves to the front window, scanning the street for any sign of their return. The grocery store clerk will later confirm that Ricky and John never arrived. No one remembers seeing two boys matching their description. No one heard voices calling from the woods. The simple errand that began with complete confidence has fractured into something else entirely. A neighbor's phone rings, cutting through the afternoon quiet. Word travels quickly in a community this close knit. Has anyone seen the France boys? Did they stop to play somewhere along the way? The questions spread from house to house, carrying an undercurrent of concern that grows stronger with each passing minute. Mother tries to rationalize the delay. Perhaps they decided to explore. Perhaps they met friends along the path. Perhaps they are simply taking their time, enjoying the freedom of an afternoon adventure. But the explanation feels thin against the growing weight of worry. By 4:00 p.m., concern crystallizes into fear. The boys have been gone for an hour with no explanation, no contact, no sighting by anyone in the community. Mother steps outside, her eyes moving across the familiar landscape that suddenly feels foreign and threatening. The world has shifted in the space of an hour, though she does not yet understand how completely. Mother walks quickly toward the wooded path, calling the boys' names with increasing urgency. Ricky! John! Her voice echoes between the trees but receives no response. The trail that seemed so benign hours earlier now appears dense and shadowed, full of hidden spaces where anything might happen. She retraces their intended route, searching for any sign of their passage. No disturbed vegetation, no dropped items, no footprints in the soft earth near the drainage areas. The path reveals nothing about what happened to her sons. A passerby working in his yard approaches with concern. He has been outside most of the afternoon but has not seen the boys since they first entered the woods around 3:15 p.m. No one has seen them emerge on the other side. No one has seen them return. People begin stepping out of their homes, drawn by the sound of a mother calling for her children. Conversations move to front porches. Phone calls spread the word to neighbors who might have information. The community that felt so safe and insular begins to organize around a growing crisis. The wooded terrain is larger than it appears from the street. Hundreds of acres of dense brush, drainage canals, abandoned farm structures, and marshy areas where sound does not travel far. A child could be injured or lost just yards from the path without anyone hearing their cries for help. By 4:30 p.m., mother makes the call that will transform a family emergency into an official investigation. Sheriff's deputies are dispatched to the scene, bringing with them the procedures and protocols that will define the search for two missing children. The afternoon that began with such ordinary trust is about to become something much darker. Deputies arrive at 4:45 p.m., their patrol cars creating the first official acknowledgement that something has gone terribly wrong. Radio chatter fills the air as officers establish a search grid and begin canvassing the immediate area. The wooded path becomes a center of expanding circles of investigation. Volunteers appear as if summoned by some invisible signal. Neighbors, friends, parents who understand that any child in this community could be their own child. They fan out through the woods with flashlights and voices, calling the boys names and searching every accessible area. The first systematic search reveals how challenging the terrain will be. Drainage canals cut through the landscape, some deep enough to conceal a body. Abandoned sheds and outbuildings dot the area, remnants of the region's agricultural past. Marshy areas thick with vegetation resist easy examination. Canine units attempt to track the boy's scent, but the dogs lose the trail at the midpoint of the wooded path, the exact location where witnesses last glimpsed the brothers walking together. Beyond that point, the scent simply vanishes, as if the boys were lifted from the earth itself. More neighbors join the search as word spreads through the community. People who barely know the Franz family feel compelled to help. The search takes on the character of a community mobilization, driven by fear and compassion in equal measure. As night falls, the search becomes more difficult and more urgent. Flashlight beams sweep through the trees, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow. Radio communications crackle with coordinates and negative reports. No clothing found, no signs of struggle, no trace of two children who should have been home hours ago. The darkness transforms the familiar woods into something alien and threatening. By 8:00 p.m., darkness has settled completely over the search area. The humidity that seemed manageable during the afternoon heat now feels oppressive, clinging to searchers' skin and making every movement feel labored. More teams deploy with industrial-strength flashlights and portable radios. Canine units work systematically through the woods, but the scent trail that began so promisingly at the Franz home continues to vanish at the same inexplicable point. Handlers try different approaches, different dogs, different starting positions. The result is always the same. The trail ends where the path curves out of sight. Local radio mentions the missing brothers for the first time during the evening news broadcast. Two children, ages 7 and 5, disappeared during an afternoon walk to the store. Anyone with information is asked to contact the sheriff's department immediately. The search expands to include abandoned buildings on the periphery of the wooded area. Teams probe the deeper drainage canals with long poles, hoping not to find what they fear they might find. Every shed, every culvert, every possible hiding place receives attention. The community response grows throughout the evening. People arrive with coffee and sandwiches for the searchers. Local businesses offer supplies and equipment. Church groups organize prayer circles. The disappearance of two children has become a collective crisis that transcends individual families. By midnight, fatigue begins to show on the faces of searchers who have been working since late afternoon. Radio chatter becomes more sparse. Flashlight batteries weaken. The initial surge of adrenaline gives way to the grinding reality of a search that has yielded nothing. Deputies pause to regroup, to consider their next steps, and to confront the growing possibility that Ricky and John Franz may not be found quickly or easily. Early morning light filters through fog that has settled over the search area during the night. Day 2 begins with the quiet efficiency of a well-organized operation, though the mood is markedly more somber than the frantic energy of the previous evening. The search extends beyond the immediate wooded area to include abandoned buildings, bridges, and outbuildings that dot the rural landscape surrounding Deltona. Every structure that could conceivably hide or shelter two children receives systematic attention. Crews begin the difficult work of dredging the deeper drainage canals. Divers probe murky water while teams on the surface use grappling hooks and nets. The work is slow, methodical, and emotionally exhausting for everyone involved. No clothing or personal belongings are recovered from any of the water sources. This absence of physical evidence strikes investigators as extremely unusual. Children who fall into water or are attacked by animals typically leave behind some trace: torn fabric, dropped items, disturbance in the surrounding area. A small crowd gathers near the command post that has been established at the edge of the woods. Family, friends, neighbors, and curious onlookers create an informal vigil. Some bring flowers. Others simply stand in silent support. Local television crews arrive to cover the story, their cameras capturing the faces of searchers in the dense woods that have swallowed 2 children without explanation. The France family's private tragedy begins its transformation into public concern. By afternoon, frustration becomes visible on the faces of searchers who have combed every accessible area twice. Maps pinned to boards show expanding circles of coverage, but the circles contain no answers, no clues, no hope. The search continues, but the certainty of quick resolution fades with each empty hour. On the 3rd day, volunteers gather before dawn, their faces showing the strain of 2 days without progress. The initial shock has given way to grim determination, but the emotional toll is evident in every conversation, every search pattern, every negative radio report. Door-to-door, interviews begin in earnest. Deputies visit every home in a widening radius around the disappeared boy's last known location. Did anyone see unusual vehicles, unfamiliar people, anything out of the ordinary on April 27th? The interviews yield nothing substantial. No resident reports strangers in the area. No one recalls unusual traffic or suspicious behavior. The afternoon when Ricky and John vanished appears to have been utterly ordinary for everyone except the Franz family. The local newspaper prints its first headline about the missing brothers, bringing the story to readers throughout Central Florida. Phone calls begin coming in from people who think they might have information, but the tips lead nowhere. Someone thought they saw 2 children at a gas station 20 miles away. Another caller reports children's voices near a different canal system. None of the sightings prove credible. Search teams continue their systematic examination of the terrain, but morale has shifted noticeably. The hope for a quick rescue has been replaced by the grimmer possibility of recovery. Conversations become quieter. Radio chatter becomes more professional and less urgent. By the end of day 3, investigators meet privately to discuss new theories and approaches. The evidence, or complete lack of evidence, suggests possibilities too disturbing to voice publicly. Accidental drowning, animal attack, abduction. None of the theories fit the complete absence of physical trace. The mystery deepens with every empty hour, every fruitless search pattern, every witness who has nothing useful to report. Early May brings the first acknowledgement that the case has moved beyond a rescue operation into a long-term investigation. The daily search teams have been reduced, though systematic examination of new areas continues under the direction of experienced investigators. The accidental drowning theory receives serious consideration. The wooded area contains multiple drainage canals, some deep enough to pose a serious danger to children. Investigators map water flow patterns and deploy additional divers to examine areas that might have been overlooked during the initial search. However, water depth analysis reveals a troubling inconsistency. Several of the canals are too shallow to completely conceal 2 bodies, even those of small children. The few deeper areas have been thoroughly searched multiple times. If the boys drowned, their bodies should have been found by now. Community fear begins to manifest in changed behavior patterns. Parents walk their children to school. Fewer children are seen playing outdoors unsupervised. The easy trust that characterized suburban life in Deltona has been damaged, perhaps permanently. The Franz family maintains a vigil of hope that becomes increasingly painful to witness. Every day without news is another day of suspended grief, another 24 hours of questions that have no answers. Another systematic sweep of the drainage canals is ordered. Using improved equipment and more experienced divers, boats push off from access points throughout the search area, their crews hoping to find something that previous teams missed. The spring weather that seemed so pleasant during those first days of searching now feels oppressive and indifferent. Nature continues its cycles, while a family waits for news that may never come. Mid-May rain showers swell the drainage canals and make the already difficult search even more challenging. Water levels rise, submerging areas that were previously accessible. The swampy terrain becomes treacherous for searchers on foot. Investigators explore the possibility of an animal attack. Central Florida's woods contain alligators, wild boars, and other potentially dangerous wildlife. Could 2 children have encountered something that proved fatal? Wildlife experts consulted by the Sheriff's Department provide disturbing but clear guidance. An animal encounter that proved fatal would almost certainly leave behind torn clothing, disturbed vegetation, or other physical evidence. Predator attacks are violent and chaotic events that cannot occur without leaving traces. No such evidence has been found despite exhaustive searching. The woods around the boy's disappearance point show no signs of struggle, no blood, no fabric, no indication that violence of any kind occurred in the area. Rumors spread through the community despite official efforts to contain speculation. Some neighbors whisper about kidnapping. Others suggest the boys simply got lost and will eventually be found. The absence of concrete information creates a vacuum that fear and imagination rush to fill. Stress begins to show in the community's social fabric. Long-standing friendships strain under the pressure of unanswered questions. Some families become suspicious of neighbors they have known for years. The comfort and security that define suburban life have been replaced by doubt and watchfulness. Every theory that investigators pursue collapses under the weight of missing evidence. Without physical proof, without witnesses, without any kind of trail to follow, the case begins its slide toward the frustrating category of unsolved mysteries. Weeks pass with no progress. The initial momentum fades. The file grows thicker but no more illuminating. By June, the active search phase has effectively ended. Deputies continue to respond to tips and investigate reported sightings, but the daily mobilization of volunteers and search teams belongs to the past. The wooded area where Ricky and John vanished has been examined more thoroughly than any piece of ground in Central Florida history. Investigators gather in a conference room to review everything they know, which is disturbingly little. Interview transcripts fill folders. Search grid maps cover the walls. Evidence bags contain soil samples, photographs, and measurement data. What they do not contain is any clue about what happened to two children. A significant detail emerges from the witness interviews. Multiple residents reported hearing nothing unusual on the afternoon of April 27th. No screams, no calls for help, no sounds of disturbance from the woods. The silence itself becomes suspicious. How do two children vanish without making any noise? Community searches taper off as summer heat makes the work even more difficult. Volunteers who spent weeks combing through brush and probing canals return to their normal routines. The crisis that mobilized an entire neighborhood settles into the background of daily life. The France family's grief becomes more visible as the hope for rescue fades. What began as a missing persons case transforms into something much harder to bear. The absence of answers, the presence of endless questions, the weight of not knowing. Investigators contemplate expanding their search radius beyond the immediate area, but resources are limited and the original search area still seems most logical. Two children walking to the store should not have traveled far from their intended path. The case file grows thicker, but no more illuminating. Every lead pursued has led nowhere. Every theory tested has failed to produce evidence. Late 1978 brings the changing of seasons and the unofficial acknowledgement that the France brothers' case has gone cold. Brown leaves collect on the trail where Ricky and John were last seen walking together. The landscape that consumed them continues its natural cycles, indifferent to human grief. Active searching is formally suspended, though the investigation remains officially open. The case shifts from daily emergency operations to long-term review status. Deputies will respond to tips and pursue new leads, but the massive mobilization of resources has ended. The first public vigil is held on a cool October evening. Candles flicker in the gathering darkness as community members gather to remember two boys whose fate remains unknown. The ceremony provides emotional release for people who have carried the weight of unanswered questions for months. Physical changes to the landscape add another layer of frustration to the investigation. Housing development has begun in areas adjacent to the search zone. Roads are being paved, wooded areas are being cleared. If evidence ever existed in the periphery of the search area, it may be lost forever under concrete and construction. The France family struggles with decisions about how to mark time without resolution. Do they hold memorial services for children who may still be alive somewhere? Do they maintain the boys' room exactly as it was? Do they speak of Ricky and John in past or present tense? Investigators close their active files, but retain hope that new information will eventually surface. Someone, somewhere must know something. Someone must have seen something unusual. Someone must be willing to come forward with information. The case that began with such urgent energy settles into the frustrating quiet of an unsolved mystery that may never yield answers. Years begin to pass. Several years after the disappearance, a detective reviewing historical cases identifies a pattern that sends cold recognition down his spine. A convicted child killer was active in Central Florida during the same period when Ricky and John France vanished. His timeline and geographic range overlapped disturbingly with Deltona in April 1978. The discovery represents the first significant development in years. The person of interest has been convicted of similar crimes in other jurisdictions. His methods match what investigators might expect in a case involving the abduction of children. His presence in the area during the critical time period cannot be dismissed as coincidence. Community rumors reignite with explosive force. People who had begun to accept that the case might never be solved suddenly find themselves revisiting old fears and suspicions. Could this be the break they have waited for? Could justice finally be within reach? Investigators approach the development with professional caution. Geographic and temporal overlap does not constitute evidence. The person of interest conviction on other charges proves he is capable of terrible crimes, but capability is not proof of specific guilt. Attempts to establish a concrete connection between the person of interest and the Friends brothers begin immediately. Investigators examine his movements during April 1978, looking for evidence that places him in Deltona on the day the boys disappeared. The work is painstaking and ultimately frustrating. Records from the late 1970s are incomplete. Witnesses' memories have faded. Physical evidence that might have connected him to the scene was never found because no crime scene was ever established. But nothing concrete surfaces. No witness recalls seeing him in the area. No evidence ties him to the woods where the boys vanished. No confession emerges despite intensive questioning. The lead that seems so promising gradually dissolves into more questions without answers. Follow-up interviews with original witnesses yield disappointing results. Memories that seemed clear in 1978 have blurred and faded over the intervening years. Details that might have been crucial are lost to time. One witness recalls an unfamiliar car in the neighborhood several months after the initial investigation, but the delay makes verification impossible. By the time the information surfaces, physical evidence is gone and other potential witnesses have moved away or forgotten the incident entirely. Community interest spikes briefly as news of the person of interest spreads through local media. People who had not thought about the France brothers case in years suddenly find themselves revisiting that terrible April afternoon when two children walked into the woods and never returned. Phone calls come into the sheriff's department from people who think they remember something relevant: a strange man at a gas station, unusual activity near the woods, and suspicious vehicles in the area. The tips are investigated thoroughly but yield no actionable intelligence. Memory degradation emerges as a significant obstacle to any resolution. Even witnesses with the best intentions find their recollections colored by years of speculation, media coverage, and conversations with other community members. Separating genuine memory from constructed narrative becomes almost impossible. Investigators circle back to terrain analysis, hoping that new techniques or fresh perspectives might reveal something that was missed during the original search. The effort feels necessary but futile. The woods have been examined more thoroughly than any crime scene in the county's history. Frustration deepens among investigators who have invested years in pursuing every possible lead. The case that began with such urgent energy has become a symbol of the limits of law enforcement, the fragility of evidence, and the persistence of unanswered questions. A hot summer day brings investigators back to the drainage canals that have been searched, dredged, and examined countless times over the years. Overgrown vegetation now covers areas that were once accessible, creating new obstacles for any examination. A former search volunteer approaches investigators with information that should have been noted years earlier. One significant drainage area was completely inaccessible during the initial search due to unusually high water levels from spring rains. The area has never been thoroughly examined. The revelation creates both hope and frustration. Hope that a crucial area might finally yield evidence, but frustration that such an important detail was overlooked during the critical early stages of the investigation. People in the community began to wonder what else might have been missed during those frantic early days when resources were stretched thin and organization was improvised on the fly. How many small but crucial details were lost in the chaos of a rapidly expanding search? The previously inaccessible area is examined with great care and high expectations. Divers probe the muddy bottom. Metal detectors sweep the shallow areas. Every inch of the drainage system receives attention that was impossible to provide in 1978. The search yields nothing. No clothing, no personal items, no human remains, no evidence that two children were ever in the area. The drainage system gives up none of its secrets, despite the most thorough examination possible. Terrain analysis reveals how drastically the landscape has changed since the boys' disappearance. New construction, road improvements, and natural growth have altered the woods beyond recognition. Clues that might have existed in 1978 are now unrecoverable, buried under time and progress. The case stagnates again, trapped between the need for answers and the absence of evidence. A detective sits in the evidence room, surrounded by files that represent the technological limitations of law enforcement in the late 1970s. No DNA analysis, no security cameras, no computer databases, no cell phone records. The tools that might solve a similar case today simply did not exist when Ricky and John France needed them most. The realization is both illuminating and heartbreaking. Modern forensic technology could potentially identify trace evidence that was invisible to investigators in 1978. Computer databases could cross-reference suspects across multiple jurisdictions instantly. Security cameras might have captured crucial moments that no human witness observed, but technology without evidence remains useless. DNA analysis requires biological samples that were never found. Computer databases need data points that were never established. security cameras cannot record events in areas where no cameras existed. Families of other missing children throughout Central Florida begin advocating for increased funding for cold case investigations. They argue that advances in forensic science create new opportunities to solve old mysteries. Resources that did not exist in the past might provide answers that seemed impossible at the time. Investigators reviewed the France brothers case with new eyes, looking for evidence that might be suitable for modern analysis. The search is exhaustive but ultimately futile. The complete absence of physical evidence that characterized the case from the beginning continues to define it. The technological revolution that transformed law enforcement arrived too late for Ricky and John France. Their case belongs to an earlier era when missing children simply vanished without leaving digital footprints or recoverable biological traces. Years pass again. The case remains open but unmoving, a reminder of how much has changed and how little difference those changes can make when evidence never existed in the first place. New housing developments replace the woods where Ricky and John France were last seen alive. Shopping centers and residential streets cover terrain that was once searched acre by acre in the desperate hope of finding two missing children. In response to racist the physical landscape where their mystery began, investigators attempt to reconstruct the original terrain using old maps, aerial photographs, and the memories of longtime residents. The effort is necessary but heartbreaking. They are trying to solve a puzzle whose pieces have been systematically destroyed by time and development. Several original search areas no longer exist in any recognizable form. Drainage canals have been filled and paved, dense woods have been cleared for construction, abandoned buildings have been demolished. The geography that defined the case has vanished as completely as the boys themselves. New residents move into homes built on land that was once crime scene tape and search grids. Most are unaware of the case's history. Children play in yards where volunteers once combed through brush looking for clues that were never found. The transformation of the physical landscape becomes a metaphor for the case's transition from urgent emergency to historical curiosity. What once dominated local headlines and mobilized an entire community has faded into the background of normal life. Detectives reach out to remaining family members, hoping that time might have loosened memories or prompted new insights. The conversations are difficult for everyone involved, investigators who feel they failed, and family members who have learned to live with questions that have no answers. Memory becomes the only anchor in a case where physical evidence never existed and physical locations have been erased. The search for truth becomes dependent on recollections that grow more fragile with each passing year. In the quiet of a family home, photographs of two young boys create a shrine to vanished childhood. The mother sits across from investigators, her voice steady despite the weight of decades spent wondering what happened to her sons. The room feels suspended in time, preserved around an absence that can never be filled. Ricky was protective of his younger brother, she explains. John rarely went anywhere without Ricky leading the way. The idea that one boy would wander off without the other contradicts everything she knows about their relationship and their personalities. The boys were inseparable, creating patterns of behavior that made their simultaneous disappearance even more mysterious. Two children getting lost together seems unlikely. Two children having an accident together without leaving any trace seems impossible. Two children being taken together suggests planning and predation that investigators have never been able to prove. Community sympathy resurfaces as local residents learn that the case is being reviewed again. People who lived through the original investigation share their memories and their theories. The passion behind their recollections proves that some wounds never heal completely, but memory proves unreliable as a source of new evidence. Details that seemed important decades earlier have been colored by time and repetition. Conversations about the case have shaped recollections in ways that make it difficult to distinguish between original memory and reconstructed narrative. Investigators document the family's timeline, again looking for inconsistencies or details that might have been overlooked originally. The exercise feels necessary but futile. Every aspect of the case has been examined repeatedly over the years. Emotional pain continues to hinder detailed recall. Grief has a way of protecting itself by blurring the sharpest edges of memory, leaving behind impressions rather than facts. Still, no leads emerge from the process. A local reporter researching historical cases discovers the France brothers' story in newspaper archives and decides to revisit it for a retrospective article. The original coverage reveals how thoroughly the case captured public attention and how completely it faded from view when leads dried up. The republication of old articles creates a brief surge of interest on social media and local news websites. People who were children during the original investigation share their memories of the fear that gripped the community. Parents recall changing their rules about outdoor play and unsupervised activities. Public reaction online demonstrates that cold cases retain emotional power decades after they have left the headlines. Comment sections fill with theories, speculation, and demands for renewed investigation. The virtual community becomes a place where the case lives on, sustained by curiosity and compassion. But renewed public attention does not generate new information. People who respond to the articles repeat theories that have been explored exhaustively. The speculation ranges from accident to abduction, but none of the armchair detectives have access to evidence that was never found. Renewed community frustration about unsolved cases manifests in letters to local officials and calls for increased funding for cold case investigations. The France brothers become symbols of all the questions that remain unanswered, all the families that never received closure. Detectives monitor public tips generated by the media coverage, but the information proves disappointingly familiar. Variations on old theories, recollections that have been reported before, speculation that cannot be verified. The public's passionate interest cannot overcome the fundamental problem of missing evidence. None of the renewed attention proves helpful in advancing the actual investigation. The case remains as mysterious as it was on the day two boys walked into the woods and vanished. A conference room in the sheriff's department fills with members of the Cold Case Review Board, their faces reflecting the soberness of reviewing unsolved mysteries that have consumed careers and haunted communities. Old files lie spread across the table like archaeological artifacts from a different era of law enforcement. The board confirms what investigators have known for years. There is no viable evidence for reopening an active investigation into the France brothers case. The absence of physical evidence, credible witnesses, and investigative leads makes prosecution impossible even if a suspect were identified. One file note captures attention. An early theory that the boys might have been lured from their intended path, but the speculation was never documented with supporting evidence or witness statements. The notation represents the kind of investigative thread that might have been pursued more thoroughly with modern resources and techniques. Community members organize small remembrance events on the anniversary of the boys' disappearance. The gatherings are quiet affairs, attended by people who lived through the original investigation and still carry the weight of unanswered questions. The file on the France brothers remains technically open, though no active investigation is planned. The case exists in the liminal space occupied by mysteries that are too disturbing to close officially but too cold to pursue actively. Board members disperse with the knowledge that they have reviewed a case that represents the limits of their profession. Some crimes cannot be solved, regardless of the resources applied or the dedication shown. Some mysteries persist, not because of investigative failure, but because evidence never existed in the first place. The boys' names remain on missing children databases, never removed because their fate was never determined. They exist in official records as questions that time refused to answer. An environmental specialist consulted by investigators provides scientific context for the case's most frustrating characteristic: the complete absence of physical evidence. Florida's climate and geography, he explains, can erase traces of human activity with shocking speed and thoroughness. Heavy rainfall in the week following the boys' disappearance likely washed away any footprints, scent trails, or other evidence that might have existed along their route. The swampy terrain surrounding the drainage canals is particularly effective at consuming organic material. Water flow patterns during the spring of 1978 could have transported small objects miles from their original locations. Fabric, personal items, even human remains might have been dispersed throughout the regional water system, making recovery nearly impossible even with unlimited resources. The public begins to understand the enormous challenge that investigators faced from the very beginning. The case was not lost due to inadequate effort or poor technique. Nature itself conspired to erase any evidence of what happened to two children. On April 27, 1978, scientific analysis confirms what investigators suspected but could never prove. The boys vanished into a landscape designed to consume secrets. The woods and waterways of Central Florida are vast, complex, and utterly indifferent to human need for answers. Detectives admit the limits that defined their investigation from the beginning. They searched with dedication and thoroughness, but they were working against environmental forces that had been operating since the moment the boys left the marked trail. The specialist report becomes part of a file that documents not just an unsolved case, but the fundamental limitations of human knowledge when confronted with nature's capacity for erasure. Silence becomes the defining characteristic of a mystery that began with silence and ends with silence. Investigators return to the file on the convicted child killer one final time, hoping that time or new information might have created opportunities that did not exist previously. The timeline overlap between his activities and the France brothers' disappearance remains compelling but circumstantial. The review confirms what previous investigations established. No witness ever reported seeing him near the trail where the boys vanished. No physical evidence connects him to the wooded area. No forensic analysis links him to any aspect of the case. His conviction for similar crimes elsewhere proves his capacity for violence, but not not his responsibility for this particular tragedy. The community remains split in its assessment of his potential guilt. Some residents express certainty that he must be responsible. The geographic and temporal overlap seems too significant to dismiss. Others point to the complete absence of evidence and argue that suspicion without proof is dangerous and unfair. Investigators face the fundamental challenge that has defined the case from the beginning. How do you prosecute a crime when you cannot prove a crime occurred? The boy's disappearance suggests foul play, but suggestion is not evidence. Suspicion is not proof. Fear is not fact. No forensic tie exists between the person of interest and the Franz brothers. No witnesses place him at the scene. No confession has been obtained despite years of investigation. The file that once seemed promising becomes another dead end in a case defined by dead ends. Investigators close the supplemental review with the same conclusion that has frustrated them for decades: insufficient evidence to proceed. The person of interest remains a person of interest, but interest alone cannot support prosecution. The door that seemed to offer passage toward truth reveals itself to be another wall. The case settles back into the quiet limbo of unsolved mysteries that may never yield answers. A local elementary school incorporates the Franz brothers' case into its curriculum on child safety, transforming a personal tragedy into educational opportunity. Students learn about the importance of staying together, following planned routes, and communicating with trusted adults about their activities and whereabouts. The disappearance that once shattered a community's sense of security becomes part of the collective knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Children who were not born when Ricky and John vanished learn their names and their story as part of growing up in Central Florida. Safety procedures developed in response to the case have helped prevent other tragedies over the years. The lesson learned from two boys who walked into the woods and never returned has protected countless other children from similar fates. Annual remembrance events continue to be held privately by some community members who feel compelled to honor the memory of children they never knew but whose fate touched their lives. The gatherings are small but persistent, sustained by the belief that remembering matters, even when understanding proves impossible. The absence of answers keeps old wounds alive in ways that resolution might have allowed to heal. Families who lived through the original investigation carry questions that have become part of their identity, mysteries that define their understanding of how uncertain life can be. One final review of the official file remains as a formality rather than an expectation. Every page has been examined countless times. Every lead has been pursued to its conclusion. Every theory has been tested against the unforgiving standard of available evidence. The legacy of the case extends far beyond the immediate tragedy to encompass questions about justice, closure, and the human need for answers that sometimes cannot be found. In the quiet of an archival room where dust motes drift through afternoon sunlight, a detective opens the Franz brothers file one final time. The folder has grown thick over the decades, filled with witness statements, search reports, forensic analyses, and investigative summaries that document years of dedicated effort. The case is formally reaffirmed as unsolved. No new evidence exists to justify continued active investigation. No witnesses have come forward with credible information. No forensic techniques have revealed evidence that was previously invisible. The mystery that began on April 27, 1978 remains as complete today as it was on that terrible afternoon when two boys walked into the woods and vanished. Ricky and John Franz's names remain permanently entered in missing children databases throughout the state and nation. Their photographs, now decades old, continue to circulate through law enforcement networks. The possibility that someone, somewhere, might still provide the key to their disappearance keeps their case technically active, even though no active investigation continues. Online community forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries feature regular discussions about the Franz brothers case. Amateur investigators share theories, analyze timelines, and debate evidence. The virtual community has become the case's most persistent guardian, sustained by curiosity and compassion rather than official resources. The file contains maps of search areas that no longer exist, witness statements from people who have died, and evidence analyses using techniques that have been superseded by modern science. It represents a moment frozen in time when law enforcement did everything possible with the tools available but could not overcome the fundamental absence of evidence. No evidence exists to ever solve the case conclusively. The boys vanished into a landscape that guards its secrets completely. Time has erased physical locations, scattered witnesses, and dimmed memories without revealing truth. The file drawer closes on a mystery that endures not because of investigative failure, but because some questions refuse to yield answers. The search for Ricky and John Franz ends where it began, with silence, absence, and the weight of not knowing.